The velvet curtain between the fitting rooms barely muffled the laughter. "Did you see her shoes?" The voice dripped with cultivated cruelty. Cracked leather. Probably her grandmother's cast-offs. Elara Ashford stood frozen in the corridor, the ivory gown she'd been examining still draped across her arms. Through the gap in the curtain, she could see 3 women in silk day dresses, their faces sharp with satisfaction. "I heard she's engaged to Duke Thornwell." Another voice, higher, more vicious. "Can you imagine? That man could have anyone, and he chose that. Someone should tell her this boutique has standards. Madame Laurent doesn't serve gutter snipes, even if they're warming a duke's bed." The words sliced deeper than any blade. Elara had walked into Maison Laurent 30 minutes ago with simple intentions, to find a wedding gown worthy of becoming the Duchess of Thornwell. She'd worn her plainest dress deliberately, a test her mother had once taught her. True quality reveals itself in how they treat those who seem to have nothing. She hadn't expected to fail the test herself. The curtain swept aside, and the 3 women emerged like predators scenting blood. Their eyes found her immediately, her worn cloak, her simple cotton dress, her ungloved hands clutching that beautiful, impossible gown. "Oh," the tallest one said, her smile a weapon. "I'm afraid that particular piece isn't available to just anyone. Stay with me, because what Elara did next would change everything, but not in the way anyone expected. What happened when the cruelest boutique in the city discovered exactly who they'd just humiliated." Chapter 1. The bell above Maison Laurent's door had chimed with such promise an hour ago. Now, standing in the center of the boutique's marble showroom, Elara Ashford felt that same bell toll like a funeral knell in her chest. The ivory gown still hung across her arms, impossibly beautiful, impossibly distant. "I don't think you understand," Madame Laurent said, her voice carrying the particular cruelty of someone who'd perfected condescension into an art form. She descended the curved staircase like a queen approaching a petitioner, her silk skirts whispering against each step. "This establishment caters to a very specific clientele." The 3 women from the fitting rooms had positioned themselves near the windows, their faces alight with the shameless pleasure of witnessing someone else's downfall. 2 more staff members emerged from the back rooms, drawn by the scent of drama like moths to flame. Elara's fingers tightened on the gown's delicate fabric. She could end this with 3 words: "I am Lady Ashford." The declaration would shatter their smug expressions, send Madame Laurent scrambling for apologies, transform cruelty into desperate civility. But that would prove nothing. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory, soft and insistent. "True character reveals itself when there's nothing to gain, my darling. When you test the world, you must be willing to see what it truly is." "I have money," Elara said quietly, reaching into her worn reticule. The coins she'd brought were real enough. Household allowance she'd drawn from the estate's general fund, deliberately avoiding anything that might mark her as nobility. Madame Laurent's laugh was crystal and cutting. "Money? My dear child, this isn't a street market where coin alone grants admission." She gestured to the gown. "That piece was commissioned for the Duchess of Meridian. The fabric alone cost more than most people earn in a year. The seamstress who created it studied in Paris for a decade. I can pay. It's not about payment." Madame Laurent's eyes traveled over Elara with the thoroughness of an executioner examining a condemned prisoner. "It's about understanding one's place. This boutique has dressed queens, duchesses, ladies of the highest breeding. We maintain certain standards because our reputation depends on the quality of our clientele." One of the women by the window tittered. Someone should have stopped her at the door. Honestly, Marie, the audacity, another chimed in. Walking in here dressed like a scullery maid and expecting to be treated like a lady. Ilara's throat burned. She'd worn this dress deliberately. Simple cotton, well-maintained but unfashionable. The kind a governess or merchant's daughter might wear for Sunday chapel. She'd braided her dark hair plainly, worn her grandmother's old cloak, left her jewelry in its velvet cases. She'd wanted to see kindness. She'd wanted to prove her mother right. That goodness existed beyond the glittering surface of aristocratic performance. Instead, she was learning a harder lesson. I understand you claim to be engaged to Duke Thornwell, Madame Laurent continued, and now her voice carried genuine amusement. That rumor has been circulating, though I confess I find it difficult to believe His Grace would choose. She paused delicately. Well, someone of such modest presentation. The words landed like physical blows. Ilara felt heat crawl up her neck, felt the familiar sting of tears threatening. She blinked them back furiously. She would not cry. She would not give them that satisfaction. The Duke and I are engaged, Ilara said, and hated how small her voice sounded in the cavernous showroom. Our wedding is in 3 weeks. Of course it is, dear. Madame Laurent's sympathy was poisoned honey. And I'm sure whatever arrangement you've made with His Grace is your own business. But you must understand, this boutique cannot risk its reputation by dressing just anyone who claims a connection to nobility. I'm not claiming. Perhaps, Madame Laurent interrupted smoothly, you might try the shops on Merchant's Row. I'm sure they would be more than happy to accommodate your budget and your circumstances. The women by the window were no longer bothering to hide their laughter. One of them whispered something to her companion, and both dissolved into giggles that echoed off the marble floors. Ilara carefully, deliberately, draped the ivory gown over the nearest velvet settee. Her hands trembled only slightly. Thank you for your time, Madame Laurent. Oh, don't be upset, dear. Madame Laurent's voice followed her toward the door. I'm actually doing you a kindness. Better to understand these realities now than to embarrass yourself, and the Duke, later. If this engagement is real, which I sincerely doubt, you'll need to learn that the aristocratic world has rules, standards, expectations you clearly don't understand. Ilara's hand found the door handle. Through the glass, she could see the cobblestone street, the elegant carriages passing, the world continuing, as if her small humiliation meant nothing. Because it didn't. Not to them. One more thing, Madame Laurent called out, her voice sharp with finality. Should you attempt to return, with proof of your claims or otherwise, please understand that Maison Laurent reserves the right to refuse service to anyone. Wealth and titles can be acquired, but breeding, true refinement, cannot be purchased. You might marry a duke, girl, but you'll never truly belong. The door chimed as Ilara stepped into the afternoon air. The sound that had promised so much an hour ago now felt like mockery. She stood on the boutique's marble steps, drawing deep breaths of the crisp autumn air, trying to steady herself. Across the street, her lady's maid, Clara, waited anxiously by the hired coach, anonymous, unremarkable, as Ilara had instructed. Inside Maison Laurent, she could still hear the laughter, could imagine Madame Laurent already turning the encounter into an amusing anecdote for her next noble client. You'll never believe who tried to shop here today. Ilara descended the steps slowly, each one a small defeat. She'd wanted to find goodness. She'd wanted to prove that beneath the glittering surface of aristocratic society, kindness still existed. that people could be decent without the promise of reward or the threat of consequence. Instead, she'd found the truth her mother had perhaps always known. The world was cruel to those it perceived as powerless. Clara rushed forward, face tight with concern. "My lady, are you—" "Send word to the Duke," Alara said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Tell him I need him." She hadn't wanted rescue. She'd wanted proof that rescue wasn't necessary. But as she climbed into the coach and the driver urged the horses forward, Alara couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just failed a test of her own making, and somehow everyone had lost. Chapter 2. Adrian Thornwell heard the tremor in Clara's voice, and knew, with the cold certainty that came from years of reading political adversaries, that something had gone terribly wrong. "She asked for you, Your Grace." The maid's words tumbled out in a rush as his carriage clattered over cobblestones toward Maison Laurent. "She's never, in all my years serving Lady Alara, she's never asked for help. Not once." The Duke said nothing. His gloved hands rested motionless on his knees, but inside his chest, something dark and volatile was building. Alara was proud. Alara was self-sufficient to the point of stubbornness. If she'd sent for him, the situation was beyond mere unpleasantness. It was unforgivable. The carriage pulled to a stop before the boutique, just as Alara emerged through the glass doors, her face composed but colorless. Behind her, through the windows, Adrian could see figures moving. Staff members, customers, all of them wearing expressions of satisfied amusement. His jaw tightened. Alara's eyes found his as he descended from the carriage, and something complicated flickered across her features. Relief, shame, resignation. She opened her mouth to speak, but Adrian was already moving past her, up the marble steps, through the door that chimed so pleasantly it made his teeth ache. The boutique fell silent as he entered. Madame Laurent stood at the center of her domain, still holding court with the three women who'd been laughing moments before. Her expression shifted rapidly through several calculations: surprise, recognition, and then a desperately bright smile. "Your Grace! What an unexpected honor!" "Tell me," Adrian said quietly, his voice carrying despite its softness, "were you the one who refused service to my fiancé?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Madame Laurent's smile faltered, then rebuilt itself with visible effort. "Your Grace, there seems to be some misunderstanding. The young woman who was just here made certain claims, but she had no identification, no proof of—" "Answer the question." Adrian didn't raise his voice. He'd learned long ago that true authority required no volume. Power lived in certainty, in the absolute knowledge that consequences would follow defiance. Madame Laurent's throat worked. "Your Grace, surely you understand that this establishment maintained certain standards. We couldn't possibly know that she was truly Lady Ashford. Her appearance, her manner of dress, so you did refuse her. We were protecting your reputation, Your Grace." Madame Laurent's words came faster now, edged with panic. A woman dressed so poorly, making such extraordinary claims. We thought perhaps she was an imposter, someone trying to take advantage of your name. We were being cautious. Adrian's gaze traveled slowly around the showroom, taking in every face. The three women by the window had gone pale. Two shop assistants near the back looked ready to bolt. A seamstress clutching pins had frozen mid-step. "How noble of you," he said softly, "to protect me from my own fiancé. Your Grace, please, if we had known—" "You would have behaved differently." Adrian turned back to Madame Laurent, and his eyes were winter itself. "That is precisely the problem. You showed Lady Ashford who you are when you believed there would be no consequences. You revealed your character when you thought you were speaking to someone powerless. Madame Laurent opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Your Grace, we never intended. What is this establishment worth? The question landed like a stone in still water. Madame Laurent blinked. I'm sorry? The boutique, the building, the inventory, the business itself. Name your price. Understanding dawned slowly across Madame Laurent's face, followed immediately by disbelief. Your Grace, you cannot be serious. I am rarely unserious about matters of business. Adrian withdrew a card from his jacket, placed it deliberately on the nearest counter. My solicitor's information. You have 1 hour to provide a valuation. If your price is reasonable, I'll purchase the establishment immediately. If you refuse to sell, I'll have my solicitor find every legal avenue to make your continued operation in this city impossible. One of the women by the window made a small, desperate sound. Your Grace, surely this is excessive. Adrian's gaze cut to her. Were you present during my fiancé's humiliation? She went white. Then I suggest you remain silent. The boutique door chimed, and Adrian's solicitor entered, a thin man with wire spectacles who carried his leather case like a weapon. Adrian had sent word the moment Clara found him. Efficiency was everything. Your Grace. The solicitor bowed crisply. I've brought the standard acquisition papers. Good. Adrian turned back to Madame Laurent, whose face had progressed from pale to ashen. You have your hour, madam. I suggest you decide quickly whether you'd prefer to sell with dignity or lose everything with scandal. This is madness, Madame Laurent whispered. Over a simple misunderstanding. There was no misunderstanding. Adrian's voice dropped to something deadly quiet. You saw a woman you believed to be powerless, and you were cruel. You laughed at her. You mocked her clothing, her worth, her very right to exist in your presence. The only misunderstanding was yours, assuming such behavior would be without consequence. 47 minutes later, the papers were signed. Adrian stood in the center of Maison Laurent, now legally his property, and addressed the assembled staff with clinical precision. You're dismissed, all of you, effective immediately. You'll receive 2 weeks' severance, which is more consideration than you showed my fiancé. References will not be provided. Madame Laurent's hands shook as she removed her keys from her chatelaine. Your Grace, please, I have a reputation, a career that... So did Lady Ashford. That didn't stop you from attempting to destroy it. He watched them file out, one by one, their faces masks of shock and fury and devastating realization. The 3 society women slipped away without meeting his eyes. The assistants clutched their personal belongings. Madame Laurent was the last to leave, her elegant posture finally broken, her shoulders curved in defeat. The door chimed behind her. Silence filled the boutique. Adrian stood alone among the mannequins and silk and scattered dreams, and felt nothing remotely like satisfaction. The fury that had driven him here was spent, leaving only a hollow ache. Outside, through the glass, he could see Alara still standing by the carriage. She hadn't left, hadn't fled. She'd waited, watching the entire scene unfold through the boutique windows. When he emerged, she was studying him with an expression he couldn't quite read. It's done, he said simply. Yes, Alara replied. Her voice was quiet, controlled, and somehow more distant than before. I can see that. Adrian waited for gratitude, for relief, for some sign that he'd successfully defended her honor. Instead, Alara simply turned toward the carriage, her movements mechanical. "Shall we go home?" she asked, not quite looking at him. And Adrian, who had just purchased an entire establishment, who had wielded his power like the weapon it was, who had delivered swift and total justice, found himself suddenly uncertain. He'd won. So why did it feel like he'd lost something infinitely more precious? Chapter 3. The carriage wheels rolled over cobblestones with rhythmic precision, each rotation marking another second of silence. Adrian sat across from Ilara in the confined space, watching her profile as she stared resolutely out the window. The afternoon light caught the tight set of her jaw, the careful blankness of her expression. She hadn't spoken since they'd left Maison Laurent, hadn't looked at him directly, hadn't done anything except arrange her skirts with meticulous precision and fix her gaze on the passing streets as if they held the answers to questions he didn't understand. He'd expected tears, perhaps, or anger that he could soothe. Even gratitude would have felt appropriate. He'd just defended her honor in the most decisive way possible. He'd purchased an entire establishment, dismissed everyone who'd hurt her, demonstrated exactly what happened when someone dared to humiliate his future Duchess. Instead, she sat like a stranger, untouchable and unreachable. "Ilara," he said finally, unable to bear the silence any longer. "You didn't have to do that." Her voice was soft, almost conversational, which somehow made the words cut deeper. Adrian frowned. "They humiliated you, yes. They mocked you, refused you service, questioned your very right to be there." "I know what they did, Adrian." Now she turned to face him, and her eyes held something he'd never seen before. Not gratitude, not relief, but a kind of weary disappointment that made his chest tighten. "I was there. I experienced every moment of it. Then how can you possibly think I didn't have to intervene?" The words came out sharper than he intended. "You sent for me. You asked for help. I asked for you." The distinction hung between them like smoke. "I didn't ask for that." Adrian felt frustration building beneath his carefully maintained composure. "What did you expect me to do? Stand by while they treated you like refuse? Politely ask them to reconsider their cruelty? I expected you to understand." Ilara's hands twisted in her lap, the first break in her controlled facade. "I wore these clothes deliberately, Adrian. I went to that boutique looking exactly as I did because I wanted to see how they would treat someone they believed had nothing." The confession landed like a physical blow. Adrian stared at her, processing. This was intentional?" "My mother used to say that true character reveals itself in how we treat those from whom we need nothing." Ilara's voice wavered slightly. "I wanted to test that theory. I wanted to see if kindness still existed when there was no advantage to showing it." Adrian stopped himself, choosing his words carefully. "That's a dangerous experiment." Clearly, Ilara's laugh held no humor. "I learned exactly what I feared I would learn, that people are only decent when decency serves them. That kindness requires the threat of consequence. That without power, I'm worth nothing." "That's not true, isn't it?" She met his gaze directly now, and Adrian saw the hurt beneath her composure, raw and deep and devastating. "You solved the problem with your title, your wealth, your power. You didn't prove them wrong, Adrian. You proved them right. The only thing that mattered was that you're a duke. Not that I deserved kindness. Not that their cruelty was wrong. Just that I belonged to someone powerful enough to punish them for it." The word struck something uncomfortable in Adrian's chest. "You think I was wrong to defend you?" "I think you missed the point entirely." Ilara turned back to the window, her reflection ghost-like in the glass. I didn't want revenge. I wanted proof that the world could be better than this, that people could choose goodness without a gun to their heads. Adrian leaned back against the carriage seat, feeling unmoored. Their engagement had been arranged. Both their families had agreed to the match 2 years ago. But over time, something genuine had begun to grow. Cautious affection, careful respect, the promise of partnership. Now that foundation felt suddenly fragile, as if he'd been building on sand without realizing it. "What did you want me to do?" he asked quietly. "Tell me, Alara. When you sent Clara to find me, what did you hope would happen?" She was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was almost a whisper. "I don't know. I needed you. Not your power, not your title. Just you. Someone who would understand why it hurt so much." "I do understand. Do you?" She turned to face him again, and now her composure was cracking, revealing the wound beneath. "You've never been powerless, Adrian. You've never walked into a room and been dismissed before you even spoke. You've never had your worth determined by your clothing, your accent, your perceived lack of value. You don't understand what it's like to be invisible." Adrian opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. She was right, in a way he'd never considered. From birth, he'd carried the weight of his title like armor. The Duke of Thornwell was never invisible, never dismissed, never questioned. Power was so intrinsic to his existence that he'd never imagined what life might be without it. "So what do we do now?" he asked finally. Alara's shoulders sagged slightly. "I don't know that either." The carriage turned onto the wide avenue leading to the Ashford estate, where Alara still resided until the wedding. 3 weeks. They had 3 weeks until they would be bound together permanently, and suddenly that timeline felt both impossibly close and terrifyingly distant. "I thought I was protecting you," Adrian said, hearing the inadequacy of his words even as he spoke them. "I know." Alara's voice was soft now, tired. "And perhaps that's part of the problem. I don't need protection, Adrian. I needed understanding. I needed someone to sit with me in the hurt and acknowledge that it shouldn't be this way, that people should be kind without the threat of consequences, that the world should be better. And instead, I bought a boutique and fired everyone." "And instead you bought a boutique and fired everyone," she echoed. And there was something almost like humor in her tone, except it was too sad to be laughter. The carriage slowed to a stop before the Ashford manor. Through the window, Adrian could see the grand facade, the perfectly manicured gardens, all the elegant trappings of the life Alara had been born into. She was Lady Ashford, heiress to one of the oldest fortunes in the realm, yet she'd chosen to make herself vulnerable to test humanity's character. And humanity had failed her, and he had failed her differently, but perhaps more completely, because he should have understood. Alara reached for the door handle, but Adrian's voice stopped her. "I'm sorry." She paused, not looking back. "For what?" "For not asking what you needed, for assuming I knew how to fix this, for solving the problem without understanding the pain." Alara's hand fell from the handle. For a long moment, she simply sat there, and Adrian held his breath, waiting. "The wedding is in 3 weeks," she said finally. "Yes." "I need time to think." The words landed with quiet devastation. "Alara." "Please, Adrian." Now she did turn, and her eyes held such complex emotion that he couldn't begin to pass it. "Just give me time." Then she was gone, stepping out of the carriage with graceful precision, leaving Adrian alone with the echo of her words and the terrible realization that in trying to prove his devotion, he might have proven something else entirely. That he didn't truly know her at all. Chapter 4. The Covington ball blazed with 1,000 candles, their light reflecting off crystal chandeliers and the jewels adorning every throat, wrist, and ear. Elara stood at the edge of the ballroom, champagne untouched in her hand, and felt the weight of every gaze like pinpricks against her skin. They were all looking, all whispering. By the time her carriage had arrived home that afternoon, the story had already begun to spread. By dinner, 3 separate letters had arrived from concerned family friends, each one carefully worded, each one dripping with barely concealed curiosity. By the time her lady's maid had finished dressing her for the Covington ball, an engagement made weeks ago, impossible to escape without generating even more gossip, the tale had metastasized into something unrecognizable. Lady Ashford. The Countess of Pemberton materialized beside her, with the predatory grace of someone who'd scented scandal. How absolutely thrilling about the Duke's grand gesture. So romantic. The word romantic carried the faintest edge of mockery. Elara forced a smile. "You're too kind, Lady Pemberton. I heard he purchased the entire establishment." The Countess's eyes gleamed. "Simply walked in and bought Maison Laurent because they'd refused you service, like something from a novel." The Duke was decisive. Decisive. The Countess savoured the word like wine. "Yes, I suppose that's one way to describe it. Though I confess I'm curious. Were you truly dressed so poorly that Madame Laurent didn't recognize you? I've always thought you had such elegant taste." The barb landed precisely as intended. Elara's fingers tightened imperceptibly on her champagne flute. "It was a misunderstanding." "Of course." The Countess's smile widened. "Though one does wonder why you were shopping alone, dressed so modestly. Almost as if you wanted to see how people would treat you without your title." Elara's breath caught. Had someone guessed? But the Countess was already turning away, moving on to her next victim, leaving Elara with the sickening realization that the truth might be worse than the lies. The orchestra struck up a waltz. Couples swirled onto the dance floor in a kaleidoscope of silk and satin. Elara remained rooted at the periphery, watching society perform its elaborate rituals while she stood outside them. "Did you hear?" A voice drifted from behind a nearby column, close enough that Elara knew she was meant to overhear. The Duke purchased an entire boutique because his little fiancé was embarrassed. How perfectly excessive. Another voice, younger, sharper. Though I suppose when one is marrying so far beneath oneself, grand gestures become necessary. Beneath himself? Elara Ashford is hardly— Oh, her family name is old enough, I grant you. But the girl herself? A pause, heavy with implication. She's always been so. Peculiar. Too serious. Too earnest. Not at all suited to someone like the Duke. Elara's heart hammered against her ribs. She should move, walk away, refuse to give them the satisfaction of knowing she'd heard. But her feet remained planted, as if some part of her needed to hear exactly what they thought. "I heard she manipulated the entire situation," the younger voice continued. "Went to the boutique dressed like a governess, deliberately provoked Madame Laurent, then sent for the Duke to rescue her. What better way to secure a man's devotion than to let him play the hero? Clever, if true. Either way, she's certainly made herself memorable. The poor girl whose Duke bought her dignity. How utterly mortifying." The word struck like a slap. Mortifying. Not romantic, not sweet. Mortifying. Elara turned blindly toward the terrace doors, desperate for air, for escape, for anything but the suffocating press of judgment and speculation. She moved through the crowd like a ghost, invisible despite being the subject of every conversation. Outside, the night air was sharp with autumn cold. Ilara gripped the stone balustrade, drawing deep breaths, trying to steady herself. Below, the Covington Gardens stretched into darkness, orderly and beautiful and utterly uncaring. She'd wanted to prove that kindness existed without obligation. Instead, she'd created a spectacle. She'd become a story people told, not inspiring, not meaningful, just gossip to fill the spaces between dances. The terrace door opened behind her. "Lady Ashford," Adrian's voice, carefully neutral. "I've been looking for you." Ilara didn't turn. "Have you heard them? The whispers?" "Some." A pause. "Perhaps we should leave, and prove them right. That I'm so fragile, so overwhelmed by my own inadequacy, that I need to be rescued from a simple ball?" Ilara's laugh was brittle. "No, Your Grace. I think I've been rescued quite enough." She felt him move closer, careful not to touch her. "I never meant for this to happen." "Neither did I." Ilara finally turned to face him. In the moonlight, his features were carved from shadow and regret. "I wanted to conduct a quiet experiment. Instead, I've become the season's most pitied figure. The poor girl, the social climber, the manipulator who trapped a duke with theatrical humiliation." Adrian's jaw tightened. "No one who matters believes—" "Everyone believes it, Adrian. Because it makes sense. It fits the narrative they prefer, that you're a powerful man brought low by a scheming woman, that I'm either pathetic enough to need saving or calculating enough to engineer my own rescue." Ilara's voice cracked slightly. "Either way, I lose. Either way, I'm diminished. You are not diminished." "Then why does it feel like I'm disappearing?" The words escaped before she could stop them, raw and desperate. "Why does it feel like every person in that ballroom sees me as nothing more than an extension of you? The Duke's acquisition, the Duke's charity case, the Duke's poor fiancé who needed an entire boutique purchased to protect her dignity." Adrian was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, almost uncertain, an unfamiliar quality in a man so accustomed to authority. "What do you want me to do?" "I don't know." Ilara wrapped her arms around herself against the cold. "I don't know if there's anything you can do. The story is already written. We're already cast in roles we never auditioned for." Through the terrace windows, Ilara could see the ballroom continuing its glittering performance. She watched Lady Pemberton lean close to another matron, watched heads tilt together in whispered conference, watched fans flutter with perfectly timed emphasis. They were all talking about her, about them. "I saw you," Adrian said suddenly, "inside, standing alone while everyone else danced." Ilara closed her eyes. "I'm quite used to standing alone. You shouldn't be. Not here. Not with me." Something in his tone made her look at him. In the moonlight, the Duke of Thornwell looked almost vulnerable, a word she'd never associated with him before. His usual certainty had cracked, revealing something unsteady beneath. "I'm beginning to understand," he said quietly, "what I did to you this afternoon. I thought I was defending your honor, but I was really defending my own, my pride, my sense that no one should dare disrespect someone under my protection. Adrian, I made you smaller," he continued, and now his voice carried a rough edge. "I reduced you to something that needed protecting rather than someone who deserved better. I didn't stop to think that my solution might become another problem. That power can wound even when it means to heal." Ilara felt something shift in her chest. Not forgiveness. Not yet. but the first trembling possibility of understanding. "I don't know how to fix this," Adrian admitted. "I don't know how to undo the gossip, the speculation, the stories they're telling. But I'm beginning to realize that perhaps fixing isn't what you need." "What do I need?" He met her gaze directly. "A partner who listens before he acts, who understands before he intervenes, who sees you as you are, not as something to be protected." The ballroom music swelled, reaching them even through the closed terrace doors. Inside, couples whirled in perfect synchronization, everyone playing their assigned roles flawlessly. "The wedding is in 3 weeks, Elara said softly. "I know. Everyone expects us to fail now. They're waiting for the scandal to deepen, for me to break the engagement, or for you to withdraw." "Let them wait." Adrian's voice hardened with something like determination. "Let them watch. Let them whisper. They're going to anyway." Elara studied his face, searching for certainty she didn't feel. "And what are we going to do?" "I don't know yet," Adrian admitted. "But perhaps we figure it out together. Not as Duke and rescued girl, but as 2 people who made mistakes and are trying to understand each other." It wasn't a solution. It wasn't even a promise. But standing in the cold night air, with the weight of society's judgment pressing down on them both, it was something. And right now, something felt like enough. Chapter 5. The library at Ashford Manor had always been Elara's sanctuary. Floor-to-ceiling shelves lined 3 walls, filled with books her mother had collected over a lifetime, philosophy, poetry, treatises on social reform that were considered too radical for a lady's reading. The 4th wall was all windows, overlooking the rose garden, where her mother had taken tea every afternoon until illness had stolen that simple pleasure. Elara sat in the window seat now, her mother's journal open in her lap, when the butler announced Adrian's arrival. She hadn't expected him. It had been 2 days since the Covington ball, 2 days of careful distance while society's speculation reached fever pitch. She'd assumed he would wait, give her the space she'd requested. But Adrian had never been patient when something mattered. "Your Grace," she said, rising as he entered. Formal, careful, as if they were strangers playing at engagement. "Don't." His voice was rough. "Please don't call me that. Not here. Not now." He looked different, his cravat slightly askew, his hair disheveled as if he'd run his hands through it repeatedly. The perfect Duke was showing cracks. "Adrian," she corrected herself softly. "I didn't expect you. I couldn't stay away." He moved deeper into the library, his gaze taking in the books, the journal in her hands, the entire intimate space that was so perfectly her. "We need to talk. Really talk. No more dancing around what's happening between us." Elara's fingers tightened on the journal. "I know." "Then tell me." Adrian stopped a few feet away, close enough that she could see the exhaustion shadowing his eyes. "Tell me what this was really about. The boutique, the test, all of it. Help me understand what I'm missing." For a long moment, Elara simply looked at him. This powerful man who'd purchased an entire establishment to defend her, who'd wielded his authority like a sword, who now stood before her, looking lost. "My mother died 8 months ago," she began quietly. Adrian's expression softened. "I know. I attended the funeral." "Then you don't know." Elara lifted the journal slightly. "You attended a formal ceremony. You saw the Duchess in her coffin, the family receiving condolences, the proper performance of grief. But you didn't know her. Not really." She moved to her mother's reading chair, gesturing for Adrian to sit across from her. When he did, she continued. My mother believed that goodness existed in all people, regardless of their station. She used to walk through the tenants' village, wearing plain clothes, helping with harvests, sitting with sick children. The servants loved her because she treated them as equals. The tenants trusted her because she actually listened. Ilara's voice wavered. The aristocracy thought she was eccentric, unbecoming of her station. She sounds remarkable. She was. Ilara opened the journal to a marked page. Before she died, she told me that the world was changing, that the old hierarchies were crumbling. She said if the aristocracy wanted to survive, we needed to prove we deserved our positions, not through bloodlines or wealth, but through character, through choosing kindness when it cost us something. Adrian leaned forward slightly. And the boutique was a test. Ilara met his gaze directly. I wanted to prove my mother was right, that beneath all the titles and performance, people could still be decent, that someone would show kindness to a poorly dressed woman simply because it was right, not because they knew who I was or what I could offer them. A social experiment. A desperate hope, Ilara corrected. I've been conducting these tests for months, Adrian. I've visited hospitals as a volunteer, shopped in markets, dressed simply, attended lectures where no one knew my name. Sometimes people were kind, sometimes they were cruel, but at least I knew the truth of them. Adrian was very still. You've been doing this for months. Yes. Testing people's character, putting yourself in vulnerable positions to see how they'd react. Yes. And you never told me. His voice had gone quiet, carefully controlled. In all our conversations, all our time together, you never mentioned this. Ilara felt the accusation beneath his words, even if he hadn't quite voiced it. I didn't think you didn't trust me. Adrian stood abruptly, moving to the window, his back to her. You've been conducting this crusade for months, risking yourself, testing everyone around you, and you never once thought to share it with the man you're supposed to marry in 2 weeks. It wasn't about trust. Then what was it about? He turned, and Ilara saw something raw in his expression. Because from where I stand, it looks like you've been keeping secrets, testing everyone except me. Or perhaps, he paused, something painful flickering across his features. Perhaps you were testing me too, just in a different way. The words hung between them like smoke. Adrian, no, were you? His voice was steady, but Ilara could hear the vulnerability beneath it. When you sent Clara to fetch me from the boutique, was that part of the test? To see if I'd rescue you? To see how I'd react? I wasn't testing you, Ilara said firmly. I sent for you because I was hurt and alone, and I needed someone who cared about me. Not the Duke. You. But you never told me about the experiment. Adrian's jaw tightened. You let me walk into that boutique blind. You let me make decisions without understanding what was really happening. How is that not a test? Ilara stood, the journal falling forgotten to the chair. Because I was ashamed. Because I knew how it would sound. A wealthy heiress playing at poverty, conducting experiments on people's character, like some sort of twisted game. Because I was trying to honor my mother's memory in the only way I knew how. And I was terrified you'd think I was foolish. I would never. Our engagement was arranged, Adrian. The words burst out before she could stop them. Our families decided we should marry before we'd barely spoken to each other. We've been courting for 2 years, but how much of that has been real? How much has been performance? Playing at affection because it's expected? Adrian recoiled slightly, as if she'd struck him. I didn't tell you, Ilara continued, her voice breaking, because I wasn't sure you'd understand. Because I wasn't sure you saw me as anything more than a suitable match, a name that complemented yours, a fortune that aligned with yours, an appropriate duchess to produce appropriate heirs. Is that really what you think? Adrian's voice was very quiet now. After 2 years, you think I see you as nothing more than a transaction? I don't know what you see. You. Ilara wrapped her arms around herself. You've never told me. We've never talked about what this engagement actually means to either of us. We've been so careful, so proper, so perfectly appropriate that I don't know what's real anymore. Adrian was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight she'd never heard before. 5 years ago, I was engaged to someone else. Ilara's breath caught. She'd heard rumors, whispers, but Adrian had never spoken of it. Lady Catherine Winters, he continued, beautiful, charming, from an excellent family. I thought I loved her. I thought she loved me. His laugh was bitter. Turns out she loved the Duke of Thornwell. When the Earl of Blackmore offered her a larger fortune, she broke our engagement without hesitation. Adrian, I learned something that day, he said quietly, that people see the title, the power, the wealth. Never the man. So when our families arranged this engagement, I thought, at least this was honest. At least you knew what you were getting. A suitable match, a proper alliance, no false romance, no pretense of love. Ilara felt tears burning behind her eyes. You thought I wanted a transaction. I thought it was safer. Adrian met her gaze, and his eyes held such complex pain that Ilara's heart ached. I thought if we both understood it was an arrangement, neither of us could be hurt. And then, over these 2 years, you became more. Your intelligence, your compassion, the way you listened when I talked about estate management like it actually mattered. I started to hope that maybe this could be real, that maybe you were starting to care. I was, Ilara whispered. I am. But you didn't trust me with your mother's mission. You didn't trust me with your tests. You didn't trust me with the truth of what you were doing or why it mattered. His voice cracked slightly. How am I supposed to believe you care when you won't let me see who you really are? The accusation landed with devastating accuracy. Ilara had been so focused on testing society, on proving her mother's theories, that she'd never stopped to consider what her secrets might mean to Adrian. I'm sorry, she said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. You're right. I should have told you. I should have trusted you. Why didn't you? Because I was afraid. The admission cost her everything. Because caring about you, really caring, meant risking the kind of hurt you just described. And I thought, if I kept parts of myself separate, if I maintained some distance, maybe I could protect both of us from disappointment. Adrian crossed the space between them slowly, stopping just close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. We've been protecting ourselves right into isolation. Yes, Ilara agreed softly. We have. Outside, rain began to fall against the library windows, a soft percussion that filled the silence between them. Two people who'd been dancing around each other for 2 years, both terrified of being seen, both desperate to be understood. I don't know how to fix this, Ilara whispered. Neither do I, Adrian replied. But I know we can't keep pretending. No more secrets. No more tests. No more protecting ourselves at the cost of actually knowing each other. Ilara looked up at him, this man she was supposed to marry in 2 weeks, and realized with sudden clarity that she wanted to. Not because their families expected it, not because it was suitable, but because somewhere in 2 years of careful distance, she'd fallen for him without even realizing it, and that terrified her more than any test ever could. Chapter 6. The rain intensified, drumming against the library windows with increasing urgency. Adrian turned away from Ilara, his shoulders rigid with a tension she'd never seen before. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of something long buried. Catherine told me she loved me on a Tuesday. Ilara went still. The name hung between them. Lady Catherine Winters, the ghost she'd heard whispered about in drawing rooms. The subject of speculation quickly hushed when the Duke appeared. It was spring, Adrian continued, staring out at the rain-soaked gardens. We'd been courting for 6 months. Her father approved. My family was pleased. Everything was perfect. His laugh was hollow. She said she loved me for my mind, for the way I cared about estate reform, for how I treated my tenants with dignity. She said the title meant nothing to her. Adrian. She was lying. He turned to face Ilara, and his expression was carefully blank, the mask he wore in political negotiations when he needed to hide everything vulnerable. The Earl of Blackmore approached her father 3 weeks before our wedding, offered twice my fortune. Mines in Wales, sugar plantations in the Caribbean. Catherine broke our engagement the next day. Ilara's throat tightened. I'm sorry. She didn't even have the courage to tell me herself. Sent a letter. Adrian's jaw worked. Very proper, very apologetic. Said she'd realized we weren't suited, after all. That she needed someone who could provide the lifestyle she deserved. That she hoped I'd understand. That's unconscionable. That's aristocratic pragmatism. Adrian moved to the bookshelf, trailing his fingers along the leather spines without seeing them. I was 23, naive enough to believe that someone could want me, not the Duke of Thornwell, not the fortune or the estates or the political influence, just me. The vulnerability in his voice made Ilara's chest ache. This was the wound beneath the armor, the reason for his carefully controlled distance, his reluctance to trust anything that looked like romance. After Catherine, I swore I'd never be that foolish again, Adrian said quietly. When our families proposed this arrangement 2 years ago, I thought it was perfect, honest. No false declarations of love, no pretense that this was anything other than what it was, a suitable alliance between appropriate families. You thought honesty would protect you. I thought clarity would. Adrian turned to face her fully now. I thought if we both understood the terms, neither of us could be hurt. An arranged marriage based on mutual respect and shared interests. Nothing more complicated than that. Ilara felt something crack inside her chest. But it became more complicated. Yes. The word was barely above a whisper. You became more complicated. Or perhaps I did. Over 2 years of careful courtship, I started to believe that maybe this could be real. That maybe you actually enjoyed our conversations about land reform. That maybe you genuinely cared about my opinions on parliamentary procedure. That maybe... He stopped, collecting himself. That maybe I could care about someone again, without it destroying me. The rain battered the windows like applause. Ilara wanted to reach for him, to bridge the distance, but something in his posture warned her to stay still. Then I discovered you'd been conducting secret experiments, Adrian continued, and now his voice carried an edge. Testing people's character, deliberately making yourself vulnerable to see how society would treat you. For months, apparently, while we were courting. While I was beginning to hope that this arrangement might become something real. It wasn't about you, wasn't it? Adrian's eyes found hers, and they held something dangerous, hurt masquerading as anger. You tested everyone, Ilara. Society matrons, shop assistants, hospital staff, everyone except me. And I keep asking myself why. Why you never mentioned this crusade. Why you never invited me to help. Why you kept this entire part of yourself hidden. I told you, I was ashamed. Or were you testing me too? The question dropped like a stone into still water. Just in a more subtle way. Watching to see if I'd care about the real you, or if I'd only ever see you as the suitable Lady Ashford, the appropriate Duchess, the perfect ornament for the Thornwell legacy. Elara felt the accusation like a physical blow. That's not fair, isn't it? Adrian's composure was cracking now, revealing the wound beneath. You conducted experiments on everyone else. You deliberately made yourself vulnerable to strangers to see their true character. But with me, the man you're supposed to marry, you maintained perfect propriety. Perfect distance. The ideal aristocratic courtship with no mess, no vulnerability, no risk. Because I was terrified, the words burst out before Elara could stop them. Because caring about you meant risking exactly what happened to you with Catherine. Because if I let myself believe this could be real, and it turned out to be another transaction, another appropriate arrangement, it would break something in me I'm not sure I could fix. Adrian stared at her, something shifting in his expression. You want to know why I didn't tell you about my mother's mission? Elara's voice shook. Because it was mine. The one part of my life that wasn't about being the perfect Lady Ashford, the suitable Duchess, the appropriate match. It was about honoring someone I loved and trying to make the world slightly better. And I was terrified that if I shared it with you, you'd think I was being foolish or naive or that I'd use my power to solve it, Adrian finished quietly. Like I did at the boutique. The silence that followed was heavy with recognition. We've both been protecting ourselves, Elara said finally. You by keeping emotional distance. Me by keeping secrets. Both of us so afraid of being hurt that we never risked being truly known. Adrian moved to the window seat, sinking down as if the weight of realization had become too much to bear standing. 2 weeks until the wedding. Yes. And we're further apart than we've ever been. Elara joined him on the window seat, careful to leave space between them. Perhaps we needed to be. Perhaps we needed to break open before we could be honest. Honest about what? Adrian's voice was raw. That this engagement was always a beautiful lie? That we've been playing at partnership while never trusting each other with anything real? That we're both wounded, Elara said softly. That we both learned to protect ourselves by keeping people at arm's length. That somewhere in 2 years of careful courtship, we started to care about each other but were too afraid to admit it. Adrian looked at her, his eyes dark with complex emotion. Do you care about me, Elara? Truly? Not the Duke. Not the alliance. Me. The question hung between them, sharp and necessary. Yes, Elara whispered. God help me. Yes. I think I've been falling for you for months, and was too terrified to acknowledge it. Because you thought I only wanted the transaction. Because I thought if I let myself hope for more, and you didn't feel the same, it would destroy me. Adrian's hand moved toward hers on the window seat, stopped, withdrew. And now? What do you think now? Now I think we're both terrified, Elara said. I think we're both carrying wounds from people who taught us that vulnerability means pain. I think we're 2 weeks from marriage, and we're only just starting to be honest with each other. Is it enough? Adrian's voice broke slightly. 2 weeks to undo 2 years of careful distance? 2 weeks to learn to trust each other when we've both been betrayed before? Elara looked out at the rain-soaked gardens, at the roses her mother had planted, at the world that had taught them both that protection mattered more than connection. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I know that walking into that marriage without trying, without at least attempting to be honest, would be a different kind of betrayal, of ourselves, of what we could be." Adrian was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible over the rain. "When Catherine left, I promised myself I'd never be vulnerable like that again. Never give someone the power to destroy me. And I promised myself I'd never be disappointed by expecting goodness from a world that valued power over character." "We're quite a pair," Adrian said, and there was something almost like humor in his tone, except it was too sad to be laughter. "Yes," Ilara agreed. "We are." The rain continued its relentless percussion. Two people sat side by side in a library full of books about philosophy and reform, both of them wounded, both of them terrified, both of them 2 weeks away from binding themselves together permanently, and neither of them knew if that would be salvation or catastrophe. Chapter 7. The roomers arrived with the morning post. Ilara sat in the breakfast room, still in her dressing gown, when her aunt entered with a stack of letters and a face like thunder. "You need to see these." Lady Margaret Ashford dropped the correspondence onto the table with barely controlled fury, immediately. 3 letters, 3 different noble families, each one expressing concern about the upcoming nuptials with the careful viciousness that aristocratic society had perfected over centuries. The first was from the Duchess of Harrington, dripping with false sympathy. One hesitates to interfere, but given the recent unfortunate publicity surrounding your engagement, perhaps a postponement might allow tempers to cool and reputations to mend. The second was more direct. Lord Pemberton wrote to suggest that certain elements of Miss Ashford's character have come to light which may warrant reconsideration of the alliance. But the third made Ilara's hands shake. It was from Madame Laurent herself, published as an open letter in the society pages of the Morning Chronicle. Ilara's aunt had already circled the most damning passages in angry red ink. I feel compelled to correct the narrative surrounding my former establishment. Lady Ashford arrived at Maison Laurent, dressed in deliberately shabby attire, behaving in a manner designed to provoke conflict. When treated according to the standards we maintain for all potential clients, she manufactured outrage and summoned her fiancé to orchestrate a dramatic rescue. The claim that this was a social experiment is merely a convenient fiction invented after the fact to excuse behavior that was, quite frankly, manipulative and unbecoming of her station. "She's calling you a liar," Lady Margaret said flatly, "and worse, she's making it sound plausible." Ilara set down the letter with trembling fingers. "She's protecting her reputation by destroying yours." Her aunt began pacing, her morning tea forgotten. "This is spreading, Ilara. By noon, every drawing room in the city will be discussing whether you're a scheming opportunist or simply mentally unstable. Either way, the Thornwell alliance will be questioned." As if summoned by the thought, a card arrived by special messenger. Heavy cream stock embossed with the Thornwell crest. Not from Adrian, from the Dowager Duchess. "My presence is required at Thornwell House this afternoon to discuss matters of some urgency." The message read in elegant, uncompromising script. 2 o'clock. "Do not be late." Lady Margaret read over Ilara's shoulder and swore with uncharacteristic vulgarity. The Dowager never summons anyone unless she's preparing for war. Thornwell House loomed against the grey afternoon sky like a judge's pronouncement. Ilara ascended the marble steps with her spine straight and her heart hammering, each footfall echoing her dread. The butler led her not to the drawing-room, but to the dowager's private study, a room Elara had never entered in 2 years of courtship. A room where, rumour said, the Dowager Duchess dismantled political careers and social ambitions with surgical precision. The Dowager sat behind a massive mahogany desk like a general at war councils. At 73, Catherine Thornwell remained formidable, silver hair swept into an immaculate coiffure, ice-blue eyes that missed nothing, posture that could make royalty feel inadequate. Adrian stood by the window, his back rigid, his face unreadable. "Lady Ashford." The Dowager's voice could have frozen brandy. "Sit." Elara sat. "I have received 17 letters this morning," the Dowager began without preamble. 17 separate correspondences expressing concern about my grandson's impending marriage. Would you care to explain why half of aristocratic society believes you to be either a calculating schemer or a disturbed young woman playing dangerous games? "Grandmother," Adrian began. "I did not ask you, Adrian." The Dowager's gaze never left Elara. "I asked your fiancé." "Well, girl, what is your answer?" Elara met those ice-blue eyes directly. "I conducted a social experiment to test whether people would show kindness to someone they believed had nothing to offer them. I wanted to prove that goodness existed beyond self-interest. How progressive." The Dowager's tone could have cut glass. "And did you find this mythical goodness?" "No, Your Grace. I found cruelty. Which is why I understand perfectly well that you're about to suggest Adrian reconsider this marriage." Something flickered in the Dowager's expression. Surprise, perhaps, or grudging respect. "You're more perceptive than I credited." "Yes, I am suggesting precisely that. This scandal has made you toxic, my dear. Association with you threatens the Thornwell name." "The Thornwell name will survive," Elara said quietly. "It has survived scandal before." "But will you?" The Dowager leaned forward slightly. "Society is quite inventive with its cruelties, Lady Ashford. They will call you a fraud, a social climber, a woman who manipulated my grandson into a grand gesture to secure an engagement that was already flagging. They will dissect your every action, every word, every past indiscretion, real or imagined. They will make your life unbearable. They're already doing that. This is merely the opening salvo." The Dowager's voice softened fractionally, not with kindness, but with something like warning. "By week's end, there will be cartoons in the scandal sheets, poems mocking your pretensions, invitations that mysteriously fail to arrive. You will be socially isolated, professionally ruined, personally humiliated. Is that truly what you want?" Elara's throat tightened. "What I want is irrelevant. I made choices. I accept their consequences. How noble." The Dowager turned to Adrian. "And you? Are you prepared to watch your wife become a social pariah? To see the Thornwell name associated with scandal and mockery? To sacrifice political alliances and social capital for a marriage that began as mere convenience?" Adrian's jaw tightened. "It's no longer mere convenience." "No?" The Dowager's eyebrows rose. "Then what is it? Love? After 2 years of careful distance and proper courtship, you've suddenly discovered passionate attachment. How remarkably convenient, given the current circumstances. Grandmother, enough. I will not be silenced in my own study." The Dowager stood, and despite her age, she commanded the room absolutely. "I have spent 50 years protecting this family's reputation. I will not watch you destroy it for a woman who conducts secret experiments and manipulates public sympathy." "She didn't manipulate, didn't she?" The Dowager's gaze cut back to Elara. "You sent for him, did you not? Summoned my grandson to rescue you from a situation you deliberately created? How is that not manipulation? Because I wasn't thinking about strategy. Ilara's composure finally cracked. I was hurt and alone, and I needed someone who cared about me. I didn't orchestrate anything. I didn't plan for Adrian to purchase the boutique or fire anyone. I just wanted— Her voice broke. I just wanted him. The admission hung in the air like confession. The dowager studied her for a long moment, her expression inscrutable. When she spoke again, her voice had lost some of its edge. My grandson's first fiancé broke his heart for a larger fortune. Did you know that? Ilara nodded mutely. It made him cautious, careful, unwilling to trust anything that resembled romance. The dowager moved to the window where Adrian stood. When I agreed to this arranged match, I thought perhaps caution was what he needed. A practical alliance, nothing messy or vulnerable. Grandmother, where is this? But watching him these past days, the dowager continued, I see something I haven't seen since before Catherine Winters destroyed his capacity to hope. I see him care, genuinely care, not about reputation or alliance or political advantage, about you. Ilara's breath caught, which makes this entire situation catastrophically worse, the dowager said crisply, because now it's not just reputation at stake, it's his heart. Again. And I will not watch another woman destroy my grandson. She turned to face Ilara directly, and her eyes were steel. So I will ask you once, Lady Ashford, and I expect absolute honesty. Do you love him? Not the title, not the alliance, not the security. Him, Adrian. The man who reads agricultural reports for pleasure and cares too much about tenant welfare and believes idealistic nonsense about parliamentary reform. The room fell silent except for the ticking of the mantel clock. Ilara looked at Adrian, really looked at him, saw the vulnerability he was trying to hide, the fear that he was about to be betrayed again, the desperate hope that maybe, this time, things could be different. Yes, she whispered. God help me. Yes. The dowager's expression revealed nothing. Then you have 11 days to prove it. 11 days before this wedding either proceeds or becomes the scandal of the season. 11 days to convince society, and me, that you deserve him. She moved toward the door, pausing with her hand on the handle. And Lady Ashford, society's cruelty has only just begun. What you've endured so far is kindness compared to what's coming. Be certain you're strong enough to survive it. Then she was gone, leaving Ilara and Adrian alone with the weight of her warning and the ticking clock counting down to either salvation or catastrophe. Chapter 8. Adrian stood outside the Ashford estate at twilight, rain beginning to fall in hesitant drops, and questioned every decision that had brought him to this moment. He hadn't sent word ahead, hadn't arranged a formal visit, had simply ordered his carriage after 3 sleepless nights of weighing his grandmother's warning against the memory of Ilara's broken voice saying I just wanted him. The choice before him was brutally simple: retreat into the safety of reputation or step forward into the uncertainty of trust. He'd spent 3 days listening to society's verdict. At his club, men he'd considered friends had offered sympathetic advice about unfortunate entanglements and the wisdom of postponement. Lady Pemberton had cornered him at a gallery opening to suggest that no one would fault you for reconsidering, Your Grace, given the circumstances. Even his own solicitor had gently mentioned that the marriage contract contained provisions for dissolution under certain conditions. Everyone was giving him permission to walk away, and some part of him, the part that Catherine Winters had wounded 5 years ago, wanted to take it. But another part, quieter and more insistent, kept replaying Ilara's words in the library. I wanted to believe in goodness, not power. The butler answered his knock with barely concealed surprise. "Your Grace, Lady Ashford wasn't expecting—" "Is she here?" "In the East Wing, sir. The old schoolroom." Adrian knew the way. He'd toured the estate during their courtship, but he'd never ventured to this part of the house. The East Wing was older, less formal, away from the grand receiving rooms where aristocratic courtship was conducted. He found her surrounded by papers. The schoolroom hadn't been used for education in years, but someone, Ilara clearly, had repurposed it. The walls were covered with drawings in children's hands. Tables held stacks of correspondence, and Ilara sat in the center of it all, sorting through letters by candlelight, her hair loose around her shoulders, ink staining her fingers. She looked up at his entrance, her eyes widening. "Adrian, I didn't— Your butler said I'd find you here." He stepped into the room, his gaze cataloguing everything. "What is all this?" For a moment, he thought she might deflect, maintain the careful distance they'd perfected over 2 years. Instead, she simply gestured to the organized chaos around her. "My mother's work. And mine now." Adrian moved closer, drawn by curiosity. The nearest stack of letters bore the Ashford estate seal, but the handwriting was rough, unpracticed. He picked one up. "Dear Lady Ashford, my daughter is reading now, thanks to the books you sent. She read me a whole story last night." "Thank you." "Thomas Barrow, tenant farmer." Another. "The medicine you arranged arrived just in time. My wife is recovering. We are forever grateful. Samuel Gray." And another. "The roof is fixed. The children are warm. You are an angel. Mary Pritchard." "There are hundreds of them," Ilara said quietly. "People my mother helped. People I've tried to help since she died. Tenant families, village children, workers who needed medical care or education or just someone to listen." Adrian set down the letters carefully. "You did this anonymously. My mother taught me that true charity requires no recognition." Ilara stood, moving to the wall where children's drawings hung. "These are from the village school. I teach there twice a week. Reading, arithmetic, history. Things their parents never had the chance to learn." She touched one drawing gently, a crude rendering of a woman in a blue dress surrounded by flowers. "That's supposed to be me," she said with a small, sad smile. "Little Emma drew it after I helped her family when her father was injured." She wrote on the back, "Lady who cares." Adrian felt something shift in his chest. Ilara moved to another table, this one covered with ledgers. "These are the charities I fund: orphanages, hospitals, a home for women escaping dangerous situations. My mother believed that privilege demanded responsibility, that if we had wealth, we had an obligation to use it for more than just maintaining our comfort." "Why didn't you tell me?" Adrian's voice was rough. "In 2 years of courtship, why didn't you mention any of this?" "Because it wasn't about impressing anyone." Ilara met his gaze directly. "It was about honoring my mother and trying to make the world slightly less cruel. If I'd told you, it would have become performance. Another way to prove I was a suitable duchess. Another accomplishment to list alongside proper deportment and French fluency." Adrian picked up another letter, this one more recent. A thank you note from a hospital administrator for an anonymous donation that had funded an entire new ward. "The boutique experiment," he said slowly, understanding beginning to dawn. "It wasn't about testing me." "No." Ilara's voice trembled slightly. "It was about testing myself, about seeing if I could still believe what my mother believed, that people could be kind without obligation, that goodness existed even when there was no advantage to showing it. I'd been helping people for months, but always from a position of power, always as Lady Ashford with resources and influence. I wanted to know if kindness would exist if I had nothing to offer. And it didn't. Not at Maison Laurent. She wrapped her arms around herself, which broke something in me, made me wonder if my mother was wrong, if the world is only decent when decency serves self-interest, if power is the only thing that matters. Adrian moved closer, drawn by the rawness in her voice. You weren't testing me. You were mourning. Ilara's eyes filled with tears. I was trying to prove she was right, that her entire philosophy wasn't naive idealism, that somewhere in this cruel, calculating world, people could still choose to be good. And when they weren't, when they laughed at me and dismissed me and treated me like refuse, I felt like I was losing her all over again. The confession broke something open in Adrian's chest. He'd been so focused on his own wound, his own fear of betrayal, that he'd missed the depth of hers. So you sent for me, he said quietly. Not as the Duke, as someone who might understand grief. As someone I was beginning to care about, Ilara corrected. As someone I hoped might see me, really see me, even when I was at my lowest. Adrian looked around the schoolroom again, at the letters from grateful families, the children's drawings, the ledgers documenting years of quiet generosity. This was who Ilara was beneath the perfect aristocratic performance. Not a schemer or a manipulator or a social climber. Someone trying desperately to honor a mother she'd loved and lost. Someone fighting to prove that goodness still existed in a world designed to reward cruelty. Someone worth defending. My grandmother gave you 11 days to prove you deserve me, Adrian said. Ilara nodded mutely. She has it backwards. Adrian closed the distance between them, his voice steady with newfound certainty. I have 11 days to prove I deserve you. Adrian, I've spent 3 days listening to society tell me to walk away, to protect my reputation, to choose safety over risk. He took her ink-stained hands in his. But standing here, seeing this, seeing you, I realize the choice isn't between reputation and scandal. It's between safety and truth. And the truth is that you're the most genuinely good person I've ever met. And I've been an absolute fool. Ilara's tears spilled over. You bought an entire boutique to defend me. I bought an entire boutique to defend my pride, Adrian corrected gently, because someone had dared disrespect what I considered mine. That wasn't about you. It was about power, about proving that no one crosses the Duke of Thornwell without consequences. You were trying to help. I was trying to win. He lifted her hands, pressing them against his chest where his heart hammered. But this, standing here with you, understanding what you were actually trying to do. This isn't about winning. This is about choosing you, the real you, the woman who teaches tenant children and funds hospitals anonymously and believes against all evidence that the world can be better. Society will destroy us, Ilara whispered. Then we'll be destroyed together. Adrian's voice was fierce. But I will not walk away. Not from you. Not from this. Whatever comes next, we face it as partners. No more distance. No more protection. Just truth. Outside, the rain fell harder, a cleansing downpour that drummed against the windows. In the candlelit schoolroom surrounded by evidence of Ilara's secret goodness, Adrian made his choice. Not safety. Not reputation. Her. Always her. Chapter 9. The Grand Assembly Hall hadn't hosted an event of this magnitude in a decade. Crystal chandeliers blazed with 1,000 candles, casting warm light over the gathered aristocracy. 200 of society's most influential families, all summoned by a cryptic invitation from the Duke of Thornwell. Ilara stood in the anteroom, her hands trembling as she adjusted her gown for the third time. Through the doorway, she could see the crowd gathering, their faces alight with curiosity and barely concealed anticipation for scandal. "You don't have to do this," Lady Margaret said quietly, squeezing her niece's hand. "We can still leave." "No." Ilara's voice was steadier than she felt. "Adrian asked me to trust him. So I will." The orchestra fell silent. Adrian stepped onto the raised platform at the hall center, commanding attention without effort. He looked every inch the Duke, elegant evening dress, posture perfect, expression unreadable. When he spoke, his voice carried to every corner. "Thank you for coming on such short notice. I know many of you are curious about recent events surrounding my engagement to Lady Ilara Ashford." A ripple of whispers. "I asked you here tonight to set the record straight, but not in the way you might expect." Adrian gestured, and servants began wheeling in display boards covered with documents, letters, and photographs. For the past 8 months, since the death of her mother, Lady Ashford has been conducting what she called a social experiment. She wanted to test whether kindness existed without obligation, whether people would show decency to someone who appeared to have nothing. He paused, letting the words settle. "Many of you have condemned her for this, called her manipulative, questioned her character." Ilara's breath caught. Was he about to defend her or bury her? But while she was conducting these experiments, Adrian continued, his voice warming slightly, she was also doing something else, something she never spoke of publicly, something I only discovered this week. He moved to the first display board, which showed letters in rough handwriting, children's drawings, hospital records. For 5 years, Lady Ashford has been funding a village school on her family's estate. She teaches there herself, twice weekly, providing education to children whose parents never learned to read. She's helped 37 families secure employment. She's paid medical expenses for 19 tenants who couldn't afford treatment. She's funded an entire wing at St. Catherine's Hospital, anonymously, asking for no recognition. The whispers grew louder. Adrian moved to another board. She established a home for women escaping dangerous situations. She's provided dowries for servants' daughters. She sent books, medicine, food, and comfort to more families than I can count, all of it anonymously, all of it asking nothing in return. Ilara felt tears burning behind her eyes as Adrian revealed her secrets, not to shame her, but to show who she truly was. The experiment that everyone has condemned? Adrian's voice turned sharp. It wasn't manipulation. It was mourning. She was trying to prove her late mother's belief that goodness existed beyond self-interest, that people could be kind without the promise of reward or the threat of punishment. He turned to face the audience directly, and when that experiment failed, when she was humiliated and dismissed and treated cruelly, I made a terrible mistake. I purchased the boutique that had insulted her, fired everyone involved, wielded my power like a weapon, and called it protection. The confession rippled through the crowd like shock. "I thought I was defending her honor," Adrian continued, his voice raw with honesty. "But I was really defending my pride. I solved her pain with money rather than understanding it. I proved exactly what she feared, that power matters more than character, that kindness only exists under threat of consequence." He looked directly at the anteroom where Ilara stood, though she knew he couldn't see her through the crowd. "Tonight I want to correct that mistake. Not with more power, not with another grand gesture, but with truth. The truth about who Lady Alara Ashford really is. Adrian gestured to the displays. These are just a fraction of the lives she's touched, the families she's helped, the children she's taught, the anonymous generosity she's shown while society gossiped about her motives and questioned her worth. He paused, letting the evidence speak. So judge her if you must. Call her naive for believing people could be good. Call her foolish for testing society's character. But know that while you were laughing at her worn dress in a boutique, she was teaching a tenant's daughter to read. While you were whispering about her unsuitability, she was funding medical care for families who had nothing. While you were questioning her worth, she was proving it in ways that mattered. The hall had gone completely silent. "I am marrying Lady Ashford in 7 days," Adrian said quietly. "Not because our families arranged it, not because it's politically convenient, but because she is the best person I have ever known. And I am honored, humbled, that she has chosen to trust me despite my failures." He stepped down from the platform and walked directly towards the anteroom. The crowd parted like water, their faces showing everything from shame to grudging respect, to honest surprise. He found Alara in the doorway, tears streaming down her face, and extended his hand. "Will you join me?" She took his hand, and together they returned to the platform. "There's one more thing," Adrian said, reaching into his jacket. He withdrew a folded document, the deed to Maison Laurent. "I told you I purchased the boutique to protect you, but this was never mine to own. It should have been yours to decide." He placed the deed in her hands. "What do you want done with it?" Alara looked at the document, then at the displays showing her secret work, then at the sea of faces watching her every move. Society, judgmental, cruel, but also capable. She hoped of change. "I want to transform it," she said clearly, her voice carrying despite its tremor, "into a training academy, a place where women from all backgrounds, servants, tenant daughters, anyone who needs it, can learn skills. Dressmaking, business management, literacy, not charity, opportunity." She looked at Adrian, then at the crowd. "My mother believed that privilege demanded responsibility, that if we have power, we should use it to create more power for others, not to control them, to lift them." Her voice strengthened. "Maison Laurent will become that. A place where character matters more than birthright, where kindness exists without obligation, where we prove that goodness isn't naive idealism. It's the hardest, most necessary work there is." The silence that followed was profound. Then, from the back of the hall, someone began to applaud. Then another. Then more, until the entire assembly was clapping. Some enthusiastically, some reluctantly, but all acknowledging what they'd witnessed. Later, after the crowd had dispersed and the displays were being packed away, Adrian and Alara stood alone in the now quiet hall. "Did I do the right thing?" Adrian asked quietly. "Revealing your secrets?" "You showed them who I am," Alara said. "Not who they wanted me to be. Not who they feared I was. Just me. And the academy is terrifying and perfect." She looked at the deed in her hands. "Thank you for understanding, for correcting the gesture instead of defending it, for seeing what I actually needed." Adrian drew her close, his forehead resting against hers. "I'm still learning, still trying to understand how to be your partner instead of your protector." "You're doing better," Alara whispered. 7 days until the wedding." 7 days, she echoed. And for the first time since the boutique humiliation, it felt like enough time. Not to fix everything, not to silence every critic, but to build something real between them. Something that might actually last. Chapter 10. The morning of the wedding arrived with unexpected snow. Ilara stood at her bedroom window, watching white flakes drift past the glass, transforming the Ashford estate into something from a fairy tale. Behind her, servants bustled with final preparations, the ivory gown laid across her bed, hairpins arranged on the vanity, her mother's pearls waiting in their velvet case. 7 days had passed since Adrian's revelation at the Grand Assembly Hall. 7 days that had reshaped everything. The scandal hadn't disappeared. Society didn't transform overnight. But something had shifted. A crack in the armor of aristocratic cruelty. Small but real. 3 noble families had already approached Ilara about the academy. The Duchess of Harrington, who'd written suggesting postponement, had sent a personal apology and a substantial donation. Even Madame Laurent had penned a careful letter, not quite apologizing, but acknowledging that perspectives can be limited when one operates from fear. It wasn't redemption, it was recognition, and somehow that mattered more. My lady. Clara appeared in the doorway, her eyes bright. There's someone here to see you. Ilara turned, expecting her aunt, or perhaps one of her bridesmaids. Instead, a young woman stood nervously in the hall, barely 20, with work-roughened hands and a plain wool dress. Lady Ashford. The girl bobbed an awkward curtsy. I'm Sarah. I worked at Maison Laurent. Not one of the ones who was cruel. I was in the back room, doing alterations. I didn't speak up when I should have, and I'm sorry for that. Ilara's throat tightened. You don't need to apologize. I do, though. Sarah twisted her hands together. I heard about the academy, about what you're doing with the boutique, and I wondered if there might be a place for someone like me. Someone who knows dressmaking but wants to learn more. Someone who wants to be part of something that matters. This, Ilara thought. This was what her mother had meant. Not grand gestures or sweeping reforms, but individual moments of courage. One person choosing differently. The academy opens next month, Ilara said gently. And yes, Sarah, there's absolutely a place for you. The girl's eyes filled with tears. Thank you, my lady. Thank you. After Sarah left, Ilara stood alone in her bedroom, snow falling outside, and felt something settle in her chest. Purpose. Direction. The sense that her mother's legacy would continue, imperfect but genuine. A knock at the door. Ilara, Adrian's voice, careful. May I? It's bad luck to see the bride before the ceremony, she called back, but she was smiling. I'm not looking at your dress. I'm talking through a door like a civilized person. A pause. I wanted to give you something. May I leave it with Clara? Moments later, Clara handed her a small leather journal, its pages worn with use. Ilara opened it carefully. Adrian's handwriting filled the first page. I've spent 2 years learning your favorite flowers, your opinions on parliamentary reform, your preferences in music and art. But I realize I never learned the things that mattered. So I'm starting now. These are questions I should have asked 2 years ago. Take your time answering. We have a lifetime. The questions that followed made her breath catch. What scared you most about your mother's death? What do you dream about that you've never told anyone? When do you feel most yourself? What would you change about the world if you could? What do you need from me that you've been afraid to ask for? 50 questions, each one revealing how little they'd truly known each other, how much they'd hidden behind propriety and careful distance. And at the bottom of the last page, I'm ready to know you, the real you, not the perfect Duchess, not the suitable match. You. Will you let me? Elara pressed the journal to her chest, tears streaming freely now, and whispered to the door, "Yes." The chapel at Thornwell House was small, intimate, filled with winter roses and candlelight. Only close family attended. Not a grand society spectacle, but something genuine. Something theirs. Elara walked down the aisle on her aunt's arm, the ivory gown whispering against marble floors. But she barely noticed the surroundings. Her eyes found Adrian at the altar, and everything else fell away. He looked at her like she was the answer to a question he'd been asking his entire life. The ceremony was traditional, the words familiar. But when Adrian spoke his vows, he added something unexpected. "I promise to choose understanding over protection, to listen before I act, to see you, truly see you, every day, even when it's difficult." "Especially when it's difficult?" Elara's voice trembled as she responded. "I promise to let you help when I need it, to trust you with my vulnerabilities, not just my strengths, to build something real with you, messy and imperfect and genuine." When they kissed, it felt like beginning, not ending, not arrival, beginning. The wedding breakfast was cheerful and small, nothing like the grand reception society would have expected. The Dowager Duchess, seated at Elara's right, leaned close during the second course. "You've surprised me, girl." Elara met those ice-blue eyes steadily. "Good or bad surprise, Your Grace?" "I haven't decided yet." But the Dowager's lips twitched almost imperceptibly. "Ask me again in 50 years. Later, as guests mingled and toasts were offered, Adrian drew Elara aside to the conservatory, glass walls revealing the snow-covered gardens, privacy amid the celebration. "I have something to tell you," he said quietly. Elara's heart stuttered. That sounds ominous on one's wedding day. Not ominous. Honest. Adrian took her hands. "I'm terrified." "Of what?" "Of failing you. Of reverting to old patterns when I'm scared. Of solving problems with power instead of understanding because it's what I know how to do." His voice was raw with vulnerability. "Of not being enough." Elara cupped his face gently. "I'm terrified too. Of retreating into secrets when things get hard. Of testing people instead of trusting them. Of disappointing you. So we're both terrified. Completely." Adrian laughed, the sound surprised and genuine. "That's not very reassuring." "No," Elara agreed, "but it's honest, and I think that's what we need. Not perfection, not grand gestures, just honesty, even when it's messy." Through the conservatory glass, she could see the Academy's location in the distance, Maison Laurent, already under renovation, its sign being replaced with something new. "The Academy opens in 3 weeks, she said softly. Sarah came this morning, the girl from the boutique. She wants to be part of it. The beginning of something different, the beginning of something better." Elara turned back to him. "Not because we're perfect, but because we're trying. Because we're using power to create opportunity instead of control. Because we chose to understand each other instead of protecting ourselves." Adrian pulled her close, his forehead resting against hers. "Your mother would be proud." "I hope so." Elara's voice caught. "I hope she's seeing this, seeing that her philosophy wasn't naive, that goodness can exist, that people can choose differently. You're proving it every day." "We are," Elara corrected, "together." The snow continued falling, soft and relentless, covering the gardens in white. Inside the conservatory, the Duke and Duchess of Thornwell stood wrapped in each other's arms, 2 wounded people who'd chosen vulnerability over safety, understanding over protection, messy truth over perfect performance. They weren't saved. They weren't fixed. They weren't suddenly invulnerable to society's cruelty or their own deep wounds. but they were choosing each other, choosing honesty, choosing to build something real from the rubble of their separate protections. And somewhere in that choice, something like hope took root. "I love you," Adrian said quietly. "I should have said it before, should have been brave enough to risk it. But I'm saying it now. I love you." Elara felt tears spill over. "I love you too. The real you. Not the Duke, not the title. You, Adrian. The man who reads agricultural reports and believes in parliamentary reform, and is learning to be vulnerable even though it terrifies you. We're quite a pair." "Yes," Elara agreed, echoing their conversation weeks ago in her mother's library. "We are." But this time the words felt different. Not resignation, not fear. Promise. The wedding guests called for them from inside. Music was starting. Toasts were being prepared. Society was waiting to see if this marriage would survive or become another scandal to dissect. But in the conservatory, surrounded by snow and glass, and the fragile beginning of something genuine, Elara and Adrian simply held each other. Two people who'd been taught that protection mattered more than connection. Two people who'd chosen differently. Two people who'd decided that love, real love, messy and vulnerable and imperfect, was worth the risk. And in a world that valued power over character, appearances over truth, that choice was its own quiet revolution. "Ready?" Adrian asked. Elara squeezed his hand. Together, always together. They walked back into their wedding breakfast, hand in hand, snow falling outside, hope blooming inside, and the future, uncertain, terrifying and absolutely their own, stretching before them like an unwritten page. Did you love Elara and Adrian's journey? If their story of wounded hearts, choosing vulnerability over protection, touched you, subscribe now for more emotionally immersive aristocratic romance stories. Each tale brings you into worlds of elegant ballrooms and candlelit estates, where powerful dukes meet resilient heroines, where secrets unravel and forbidden love blooms, where redemption is earned through understanding rather than power. Thank you, and I will see you in the next one.